Our next speaker, the third of the panel, is Angela Hawdon, and she's Strategic Engagements Manager at Farming for the Future. She's a land manager strategist with over 25 years of cross-sectoral experience. As an ecologist, she has worked on biodiversity offsets here in Australia and overseas in interesting places like Mongolia, as we discussed last night. I'm sorry, Mongolia. I love Mongolia, for BHP Billiton. More recently, she played a pivotal role in initiating the development of bush heritage's agricultural strategy. So Angela will love this word, enhancing farm profitability, resilience and sustainability, all important words. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks very much, Kerry, and thanks to the CMA for the invitation to speak today. And it's such a great opportunity because the lineup you've got here today is just brilliant. It's like the 101 plus of natural capital accounting. And I'm really happy that it's been teed up this way for my talk because Katie has done such a great contextual sort of framing of the project that I'm talking to, and Jim has done a massive part of my talk in terms of the methodologies that we've used to bring this work together. So the Farming for the Future project is the flagship project of the MacDoc Foundation, which is the philanthropic entity of Prue and Alistair McLeod. They're really passionate about making sure that we can build resilience in people and the planet over time. And really importantly for them are three things: improving the health and resilience of productive landscapes, improving rural and regional communities, and accelerating change and action on climate and on biodiversity loss. So what Farming for the Future has been designed to do is to work towards building collaborations of industry stakeholders to reveal the relationship between natural capital and farm business performance. So the work that Jim has done is in helping us create the ability to do those natural capital accounts. We're now putting together with the farm production and financial information to produce a view of how natural capital is actually impacting farm performance. But to do this, the first question we needed to ask was, well, would farmers are they even interested in natural capital and investing in natural capital? And when we asked this question, we found that their motivations for doing so were their farm business. It was the resilience of their farm, the profitability and production additions that they might get through investing in natural capital. And when we asked them to rank their interest in this, their motivations, the first four that came up regularly were around farm performance. It wasn't about other additional things. It wasn't just a feel good around, having more biodiversity on the property. It was very specifically about productivity, resilience, income stability, and reducing income costs. The next two were all about commodity markets, access to premiums or access to new markets. And seventh on the list was the question around entering additional markets. Now, in some respects, we shouldn't be surprised. Farmers are business people and they're really interested in how anything can support their existing business. And that's what natural capital, we believe, and that's what we're testing, is whether natural capital and how natural capital can actually support farmers to do their core production, to just farm and farm successfully, particularly in a changing environment where climate is changing, we're losing biodiversity. How can we encourage farmers? How can farmers be encouraged to invest in natural capital so that they can continue to farm? So we're not saying that markets aren't important, they absolutely have a role here, but it's really interesting that there's still a lot of heavy lifting to do in just getting farmers to understand how nature can support their farm production. And so this will look very familiar to people. Thank you, Jim. So I think I don't need to spend much time on this because Jim did a great job in explaining how the ecosystem services from nature can support that farm production. So how the trees can support shade and shelter for farm production while also supporting wildlife habitat. It's those sorts of relationships that joint benefit that we're looking for so that we can create those incentives for farmers to engage in natural capital management. So in conceiving this project that we want to test and putting this together, we kind of look at this as like a hypothesis on a page. So if you have a measure of natural capital down the bottom, and that might be ecological condition, for instance, and then on the y-axis we have a measure of farm performance, and we've used efficiency in a lot of our analysis. What we consider, we think we'll see in our hypothesis is that there'll be an optimum point at which farmers are getting everything they can out of natural capital. And if they kept going with more tree planting and the like, they'd end up in a trade-off zone across the other side, which is a really important thing to understand, because if markets and supply chains are going to require farmers to do more on that natural capital end of the spectrum, then they need to understand what the trade-off is and be compensated for that fairly. On the other side of the equation, though, more importantly, there's lots of space for potentially this double dividend zone, the area in which farmers can be investing in natural capital to improve their business performance and also reduce the variability in their income. So these are the sorts of things that we want to test. And what we've proved through this process is one that we can now manage. We can now actually measure natural capital. We needed to be able to show that we could do that. That the data is trusted, it's strong and robust, and producing this really strong and robust evidence case. But we also need to be working with the supply chain, because we've just heard from Katie the pressures that are coming on that supply chain. And while we talk about their need to report, we kind of miss the element there that why they're reporting. The why they're reporting is that they need to keep producing from these farms. For those companies to continue under climate change and with the risk that that poses, they need to be sure that the farmers can keep producing for them. So this is not just about passing on data to the supply chains so they can tick a box. It's about making sure that you've got relationships with your supplier, your customers as farmers, and they can rely on you to keep producing. That's the reason they're asking for this data. So in framing this up as a project, what we understood we needed to do was create this large-scale evidence base to create that graph. For all of Australia, ultimately, we've started modestly, but we've got big plans. We need to create that large-scale evidence base. So doing the natural capital accounts, as Jim has so beautifully explained, but also collecting 5 years of farm production information and putting that together. So we collect information about production and your financial information and putting them together into a report so that you not only get a natural capital account and all of the detail, the 80-page report with the lovely maps and graphs, but you also get a detailed economic report, which the farmers will receive in the next couple of months. And to do that, to do what I've just described, we refer to as the sausage machine. That takes some building, and we've now built it, and we're very proud of the work that we've put into that because it hadn't been done before. And there's a lot of partners that have come on stream to allow us to do this. There's a number of them in the room today, not only the farmers, but on the advisor side. So we've been working with CMAs and NRMs and land care groups and other ecologists to help us collect this information on farm. And we've been working with farm advisors and farm accountants to help collect that financial and production information. And they're critical in this scheme because they're the ones that can turn our information, our research, into advice back to the farmers so that that can be actioned. So embedding this into the system is vital because we don't want to do this once, spend all this effort and let it sit. We know that climate change is going to be an issue for time to come, and we need to be collecting this information regularly and feeding this back to farmers so that we can adapt as quickly as we possibly can to the changes that are coming down the pipe. And again, we still need to be working to prime and align the system with the supply chain, with the banks who are supporting the farmers. And the project is all based around enabling farmers to continue to operate. So we need to involve that supply chain and the finance sector to help the farmers to collect the data, to understand the data, for them to value what the data can do in their own businesses, but to do that so that they can help the farmers to collect this data. It needs to be a shared thing because the data won't, while it's really critical that it is impactful on the farm and can help with farm decision making, it is also going to be valued at the other end for decision making in corporates and financial institutions as well. So ultimately what we're doing here is trying to make natural capital a factor of production just as part of any other mainstream part of farm management. So we've been across 130 farms to date. We have partnered with those farm advisors and accountants, over 20 of them across Australia. We've developed the tool sets, we've developed the analysis processes, we've got the data partners to help us bring down the price over time, or the cost of doing the data collection, and we are starting to pull out our research findings. So this is the first time I'm presenting on the research findings, so bear with me as it can get a little complicated. I don't need to go through this too much because, again, Jim described most of these, but the indices that we've used that Jim has derived, just to mention them, the ecological condition, ground cover as a proxy for soil health, resilient forage condition, so looking at the palatability, persistence, productivity and perenniality of the pastures, the aggregation of trees across the property, proximity of the trees to shade and shelter, to production areas, and the connectivity of the canopy across the landscape. We've also added, I don't think Jim mentioned, the sequestration element that we've added into ours. So the farmers also get a measure of the carbon balance across the property, not including soil carbon, just woody vegetation. And it's produced with 3 different arrays of information. So they get the maps, as Jim said, they get a tabular version so they can see change over time, and they get this index. And we've used the index, which is that summarised number for each one of these 6 or 7 different indices to create the graphs. So the farmers get the farm report, the economic report, and they have access to their farm advisors and then to our findings. So the key messages from our findings are that yes, there is a double dividend zone. We've actually shown that natural capital is positively correlated with production efficiency across a number of the natural capital indices, and that does provide that evidence of the double dividend zone. It's also supporting farm businesses by improving productivity and or reducing input costs. So we've shown that, and these are relevant to different degrees in different parts of the study area, but they're clearly there. There's also, natural capital is also positively correlated with financial performance, so that's gross margin and EBIT. And we've got a really strong relationship between high natural capital and higher levels of resilience to both climate and market shocks. So bear with the graphs in the next few slides. You don't need to, remember all of these or get into the detail, but it's just to sort of show the indication of what we've found. The caveat across all of this is that we still need more data. 130 farms, it was a great first start, but we need more data to get greater certainty in these numbers and to improve the confidence of our findings. But across all of the 130 farms, we found that there is a correlation with ecological condition, with ground cover and with proximity. So that's that shade and shelter benefit of trees. So these are significant outcomes. We can still see there may be some relationships with aggregation and connectivity, but they're not significant. And we've used efficiency on the scale here on the y-axis. And it's important to note that while you probably can't even see the numbers here, but efficiency is relatively marginal improvements, but they translate to impressive gains on the ground. And efficiency is already really high in agriculture. It's just the way the statistics work. Most people who aren't efficient have left the system already. So even small improvements in efficiency can create great gains in profitability. And this is the graph for resilience. So resilience here is the variation in EBIT per hectare. And you can see, well, you won't be able to see, but this is the 0 mark. So if you don't have, so in terms of resilience, you have to have this much natural capital before you have resilience in your, or stability in your income. So there's a minimum amount of natural capital that you have to be resilient at all. And this is resilience to input prices, output prices, rain, whether a lot of rain in floods or droughts, and also to terms of trade. So we're seeing that, yes, there's a strong relationship between resilience and natural capital. And then it gets even more complicated. And this is, again, where we need more data. But what we were able to do is, when we looked into the data, we could see 3 different types of farms that were sort of 3 different types of farms and Western Australia, which are just different. And we were able to tease these out, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on this, but we were able to tease these out from the different attributes of the way the farm was managed. But what we were able to see was with each of these 3 different farm types, they showed a positive association with natural capital across some or a range of the different indices. And that regardless of what type of farm type you had, you were able to improve your production efficiency by investing in one or other types of natural capital. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But we did absolutely see trade-off zones as well. So, so that's really interesting and something for us to delve into further to better understand. So again, oh, they even look worse up there, but they're horrible graphs. But really only to show that I'm just trying to, and I don't know if you can even see it, but there's 3 types of, the 3 farms are graphed on each one of these, and they're taking different trajectories in terms of the natural capital. So we need to get into the detail here to better understand how natural capital is affecting different types of farms. And so to the farm types. We've used a whole heap of management information to cluster these farms using a clever statistical model. And we've come up with these different 3 types of farms. So the first one, the green one, is what might be called an intensive livestock farm, and I should explain, we've only studied livestock farms. I should have said that earlier, sorry. So these are high chemical using farms, high sown exotic pastures, high stocking rates with very low variability, low canopy cover. There might be some trees in a set-aside, but they're not integrated across the grazing system, very few shelter belts, and low numbers of paddocks per DSE. And then in group 3, the blue one, it's sort of the other end of the spectrum. They're low input farms, low chemical use, high percentage of naturalised pastures, low stocking rates with higher stocking variability, higher canopy cover, and trees integrated into the grazing system, more shelter belts, and high numbers of paddocks per DSE. And then we have our problem child in the middle, that we're still kind of trying to understand what's going on with group 2. They're low chemical use but high naturalised pastures. There's moderate stocking intensity and low stocking variability. There's moderate canopy cover and trees do seem to be integrated, and there's a few shelter belts and low numbers of paddocks per DSE. So in using these types of farms as a way to further get into the detail, we can see that group 1 farms have a positive correlation with aggregation, which is how the trees are distributed across the property. So as you get into, and you again, you won't be able to see, but it's very low numbers of trees to begin with. So there's not a lot of trees, but it would seem that where they're clustered, the farm is getting a benefit from that. And a strong correlation with ground cover as well. So we think the ground cover might be significant because the more ground cover they've got, where these are types of farms that were predominantly sown annual and perennial pastures and forage crops. Some producers also had commodity crops in rotations. So we think that possibly we're seeing the effect of having, you might have just sown a paddock, so that's coming up in the ground cover statistics. And it might be that because they're changing all the time, they're not getting the benefit of nutrient cycling and organic matter formation in the soils, and that they may be requiring more inputs to keep those systems going. Thank you. Aggregation, we can see that this is also correlated and as I mentioned, is probably giving some benefits from shade and shelter for stock. In terms of group 3, we're seeing really strong relationship with forage condition, and this probably relates to the fact that these types of farms were historically prone perennials and are now transitioning across to more native, later successional types of properties that are getting a higher stem and leaf ratio and more palatability. So they're benefiting from that in terms of natural capital. In terms of group 2, our problem child, we get this quite strong relationship with ecological condition, and then this strange trade-off in aggregation that's got us a bit puzzled because it's not a really strong aggregation score either. So something's going on here, and we think it may have that these are in an adaptive management phase where they may not have a lot of control over their environment, possibly. That the ecological condition is giving benefits in terms of native grasses and forbs, possibly, and the aggregation is, a bit puzzling at this point, but we'll keep working on it to try and better understand it. So the next phase of our research is to partner, and there's a number of groups in the room who we look to be partnering with in our next phase. We're fundraising presently. We've got a grant in with the Climate Smart Ag program to be working with the CMAs that are here today, and we really look forward to doing that, hopefully July, fingers crossed. We need to be doing more of the livestock farms in the areas that we've already been, but we also want to extend into some other areas. We think, about 400 farms to be confident in our data, and we're looking to extend into other types of agriculture. Of course, Jim mentioned we need a soil health index or way of measuring soil health that's robust, that can be rolled out across the whole of the farm and won't send us broke. And that's the soil scientist's job. But we are also continue to work with the banks and supply chains, and we've been doing some really interesting work with AWI on the use of these metrics for certification schemes in wool, and we're working with banks to look at the value of the trees on the property and how we might... We're also doing one of the elements of this project that I haven't even mentioned till the very last minute is we've also been surveying for well-being of the farmers as well, and that's still in the research phase, still in the analysis phase, so we haven't got the findings from that side of the research at this point. But there's more to come, and I think the element of this is the why you would bother with natural capital that the question was asked before. This is how we can turn this research into advice for farmers to be investing in natural capital so that they're getting a boost. The loss of wildlife, the carbon losses across Australia have been in agricultural lands, and that's where they're going to get the gains. It's 58% of Australia or thereabouts. So we need to be working with the farmers to improve natural capital. They need a good why, and we think this is the why. We need to pick this through the research to find out why it is that farmers will engage in natural capital and how we can support them to do it. So thank you for your attention and support.
So we've got time for a couple of questions from Katie before we move into the panel. Were there any? Yep, Lexi, we need a...
I was just wondering about how you help farmers understand the future value as well of on-farm habitat, because not all on-farm habitat is going to be equal in terms of resilience. So how does the future generations value and lens feed into the natural capital work?
Well, I think if we can show that the different parts of the farm that are supporting farm performance, that are helping to generate, financial benefits for the farm, then that should be an incentive for them to continue to invest in those parts of the farm. I think the other element that will come is the relationship with supply chains and farm and the finance sector, who is going to want to better understand and will help the farmer to value those areas that may not be as productive right now. Is that helpful? Oh, sorry, you actually mean, at this point in time, we've done this part of the research. There is some work that will be being done on the value of trees in terms of return on investment and how that might translate into changing property values. There's work that the finance sector is looking to do on that. So if we can show that, for instance, trees have a benefit to the bottom line of farms, that should change the relationship about how farms are valued.
Any more questions? Oh, up there.
Angela, towards the end you mentioned that you were measuring farmer wellbeing, which is a great idea. How are you doing that though?
Yeah, so when we've been doing our farm data collection, we've also surveyed the farmers using the University of Canberra's Farmer Wellbeing Survey, I think it is. So we're using the same type of approach of that, and then looking at we will be looking at natural capital in relation to farmer wellbeing and the general average that the University of Canberra comes out with their broader survey. So we can sort of see any relationships between farms that have strong natural capital and farms that don't, and look at farmer wellbeing in that respect.
Okay, last question.
Is there consideration of collaboration with traditional owners in future research?
Well, we absolutely would love to. We just haven't cracked that nut. It's been difficult from that perspective because we're looking across Australia, and so different Aboriginal groups are in different parts, and so I think the way that we need to do this is through our partners, through our CMAs and others who have their on-ground relationship, and we're more the research partner at the back doing the nerdy data collection and analysis. And I think those relationships probably are more on ground through our partners.